I was officially erased from Canadian society, but somehow I'm still here, at least the part of me that wasn't killed off. People know to avoid me. Canadians have a special knack for maneuvering around controversy. Kevin Annett, June 2013. Thank you, and here we are with Mr. Annett. Annett. See, I have to, I make that mistake, and it's a bad habit I've fallen into of saying Kevin Annett, and I just want to clarify right now, it's Annett.
Yeah, call me whatever you like, just don't call me a cab.
And this was on the back of the paper, which is something we've just discovered. So I think that's serendipity.
It is. Yeah.
Or the work of the creator, because there it is. Man,
amazing.
Try to get away from it, and you can't, can you? So let's go have some lunch, and we're going to have a chat, Kevin and myself.
Good.
Great. Okay. Hi, Mosh. That's my little dog. So, I guess the best question to start with is, who is Kevin Annett?
Gee, I wonder that myself sometimes.
What's that? Who are you?
Who am I? I don't want to give you a lot of biography, because people know that already.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm trying to stay away from with
I can tell you who I feel like right now.
Okay.
I don't want to sound corny, but I feel more like who I'm meant to be all the time. And I don't know. Keep asking. I can't. It's hard. It's kind of like giving a sermon. Like, it's interactive.
It's a Barbara Walters question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who is Kevin Annett? Yeah. Now, when you were a kid, were you a smart kid?
In some things. I loved history and geography and English. You know, I excel in that. I never did well in things I didn't like. I flunked French. I flunked math. I was terrible, really, in the sciences. Although, you know, school is so ridiculous.
I know, but we know. Yeah. I've just realized that recently. Just that whole school system. What's his name? John. There's just so much information now about the socializing of school, and well, it's putting kids in that structure, making little machines out of them at that early age.
And that's something I always rebelled against. I didn't. In high school, I got involved. I went to school. Let me back up. As a teenager, I moved out to Winnipeg, from Winnipeg to Vancouver. So I arrived in Vancouver age 12, 1968. I did all my high schooling out at University of British Columbia, a school called University Hill. As a matter of fact, Gordon Campbell, the Premier of British Columbia, was 4 years ahead of me. And his mom was the school secretary. That's my big claim to high school fame here. Although it's nothing I like to boast about.
You guys are just diametrically opposed now as far as who you became.
But anyway, at U Hill, we had this alternative system that came in when I was in grade 10. So it was pretty much a free school. And I could structure, we could structure things however we liked. So I loved that. And I was always out at the school building, like making films. You could get credit for shooting a video film,
Back then?
Oh, yeah, this is mid-'70s.
Wow.
Early to mid-'70s.
Because we're similar in age, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. None of that was available to me.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Was it a rich school that you went to?
Oh, yeah. The kids of profs and business people and that.
Was your dad wealthy?
No. Dad, well, he was a stockbroker for a while, but he did a lot of different jobs. He drove a cab, for part of the time, and he was a writer. He really is a writer. That's where I get it from, the Annett side. We're a long line of writers.
Now, how far were you from Kitsilano?
And shit disturbers. What?
Oh, yeah, me too. I guess it's in our DNA. Now, why would you, were your family very religious?
No, I was the first minister in family memory. We were religious dissidents. We were Huguenots who fled France. So I often say to people, this is personal between me and the Vatican, because they've been killing my ancestors for 400 years. Right?
Well, what's a Huguenot?
French Protestant.
Wow.
There was about 1 million of them. They were driven out of France, those that weren't burned at the stake. And a lot of them came to Annett, to England, Holland, other areas. Any, like the name Annett, sounds kind of French. Annett, people often say. Anybody with a French-sounding name is probably Huguenot origin.
That fled.
Huh. So anyway, that's my background, but family history. a little bit of it, but no, I was the first. People were very shocked when I said I wanted to become a minister, because I had trained at university. I got my degrees in anthropology and political science, and I was ready to get my doctoral degree and teach poli-sci, right? And then I decided, for some reason, strange reason, I just decided to go into the ministry, United Church.
Do you remember what motivated that turn?
Yeah, I saw this burning bush one day, and a voice spoke out of it. And it said, Kevin, I want you to confront the corruption and all those murdered children killed by your church, and I want you to bring down that guy in Rome, right? That's your purpose. And then the clouds closed, and I knew what I had to do.
It's just so strange that you chose that.
No, actually, to tell you the truth, it happened at a low point in my life. And I felt I was kind of at a dead end. I knew that if I just go and teach somewhere, it's not going to mean anything to me if I just teach, right? But I had to do something more, and I couldn't put a name on that. I just felt I had to, and I thought, well, if I'm doing the ministry, then it gives you a chance to work with people.
Stop it, Moose. Sorry.
Yeah, we've got an intruder here who happens
Come
to
here,
live in the
Moose. You
house.
don't have to do that. Sorry about that, Kevin.
Hi, Deb.
Moose is being his guard dog self.
So, anyway, I got a sense that I had to do something more than just teach. That there was something inside. You might call it spiritual, but I don't know. I was searching. I didn't have a final answer. I had to do more than just be an academic. I also wanted to carry on and do what I wanted to do since I was a teenager and change the world fundamentally, so that the people who are running things, who are by and large psychopathic murderers, don't have to be in charge anymore, and that the people themselves can.
But did you think you could do that through the church in those days?
I thought I might try, because I tried the hard political grid. I was very involved all during my 20s in left-wing politics.
I know, I read that, where you went down to
Hamilton.
East Hastings to
Well,
Hamilton?
I ended up in Hamilton. I was a member of a group called the International Socialists. It was kind of a left-wing Trotskyist group, whatever word you want to use. I went to work in the Hamilton steel industry in the mid-'70s because we wanted to have a revolution, and we figured that Hamilton steelworkers were the ones who were going to cause it. So I did that for about 4 years.
Was that in the summers?
Every day of my life for 4 years.
Really?
Yeah, I was working, kind of as someone trying to overthrow the state.
So this is
directly.
after high school, before university?
Yeah, I didn't go to university for 5 years after high school. I thought it was bullshit, and I didn't want to. I saw no purpose in having a career. I thought the most important thing is to get out there and make the revolution, to work with people, overthrow oppression, and just do it directly. And I didn't need a university degree to do that, right? So.
Was your dad like that, do you think?
No, at the time, Dad was pretty conservative. He's a lot more radical now.
But he was trying to fit into the box, kind of, and
just
raise his family.
Fairly ordinary Canadian, and my family were all like that, fairly conservative.
Yeah.
And didn't know anything about genocide in their own country. I mean, just your standard, quote, white Canadian, right? So they thought I was weird, and they thought I was even weirder when I decided to go through the ministry. So.
Wow. Yeah, I had to ask you that. And I was wondering about Jesus, the whole notion of Jesus, because if I'm totally honest with myself, I want to believe in Jesus. I do notice when I pray to Jesus, it's like for me, this is me. I don't know how it works. I just know it works. But the whole organized religion and stuff really repulses me. So I'm curious what your relationship was with Jesus back then. Did you have any profound experience prior to going to?
No.
No.
I think that's a personal issue that people have to describe in their own way, because the idea that an organization, no matter what you call it, church or anything, can bring in the truth and provide the truth for everybody in the same way is nonsense.
Yeah.
It's a corporate idea. It's an imperial idea, and that's why what you call the church, and okay, we're talking the Roman Catholic Church because that's the one that all the other ones evolved out of, okay?
Well, the Greek Church, then Catholic, yeah.
I mean, they all came from the original thing
Right.
in Rome, and their whole idea is that God has to be mediated, or don't even call it God, but the truth and ultimacy, morality, has got to be mediated through somebody to your average human being. People can't figure it out for themselves. That's what they keep telling you. You need these people to interpret the truth for you. which I've never believed, and I think that that whole notion goes against everything Jesus was teaching.
Yes, man.
He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. Okay? He didn't say it's in the church. He didn't say it's in the communion wafer. He didn't say it's in the Pope in Rome. As a matter of fact, he never mentioned church or popes or Trinity or any of that nonsense.
Right.
Okay. So he said, you do it yourself and with each other. And when he was talking about the kingdom of heaven, which he was always going on about, he was only in the Gospel of John do you ever see him mention, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Gospel of John is always talking about, I am the Son of God. All the other Gospels, he never says that. He says he's going on about this kingdom of heaven, right? And he's talking about a new society. He's saying how we all work together on the basis of equality. We're all one. We're all equal. We all work it out and help each other. You love each other and you do what's right. I mean, that's all he's trying to do in the world. And yet this whole religion is built on it. And the line I like the best is in Monty Python. They had a character called Vice Pope Eric. And with Michael Palin dressed up like a bishop, but he was like a gangster, right? Yeah. He was smoking a cigarette. He said, listen, boys. He got all his cardinals and bishops together. Listen, boys. If we're going to worship a poor, humble man, we're going to need a rich, wealthy institution to do it with. Which I think it sums it up brilliantly, because that's the whole thing. These guys have nothing to do with Jesus Christ. They're, if anything, a replica of the Roman Empire, and we all know that.
I absolutely believe that it's all our own. It's our personal journey also on how on spiritually what works. It's like anything else, really. Mm-hmm. I think there are some fundamentally, truths, like universal truths. I sometimes wonder if Jesus wasn't just trying to guide us towards those universal truths.
He was one of the people. I don't think, this notion that he was the Son of God, that's not even what the translation says. It always talks about the Son of Man, which just means an ordinary person. In other words, it's like he was somebody who was telling it like it is, and more than that, though, he was naming what the real problem was. The thing that got him killed was the thing that got him almost lynched the first time he opened his mouth. Same thing. You look at the two passages. The first time, and they're both in the Gospel of Luke. The first time he gets up in the Nazareth synagogue where he grew up, he recites from Isaiah. He says, "The Spirit of God is on me, for I've come to bring good news to the poor, to set the captives free, to open the prisons, to break the chains of oppression, to bring sight to the blind, and to bring in the year of judgment." And that meant equality. He said, "The revolution's arrived, folks. Here I am. We're going to do it now." They almost killed him. The account says they dragged him off to a hill to throw him off the cliff, but he walked through the crowd. I mean, that's in his hometown. They almost kill him when he opens his mouth. Final scene, he goes into the temple. We all know the cleansing the temple scene, right? He trashes the money changers out of the temple in Jerusalem, and they crucify him for it. And so, I mean, each time, what's he doing? He's confronting organized religion and hypocrisy and the power of the state and church together, which is what the temple was, right? So he does that, and they kill him for it. And that's exactly what they do to any of us.
Well, that's what they're doing now.
Exactly. Right.
Brings me to the next question. Oh, here comes our coffee. Oh, it's a lovely, lovely job you've done there, miss. I'm sorry, what is your name?
Our lovely assistant, who will not be filmed.
I'm craft services.
Okay.
Come on, Luke.
So, I guess the next question, I have to ask this just before I forget. Were you feeling like this when you started, when you were ordained a minister? Were you feeling like this about Christ as well?
Yeah, I've never really changed the attitude. I mean, I wasn't there to preach and convert people to anything. It's kind of like when my daughters were born. I have three daughters now, actually. But my two biological daughters, Claire and Eleanor, when I was there at their birth, and I helped bring Eleanor into the world, I helped deliver her, which was amazing. But that's why I think priests and popes should have their own kids.
Me too.
Because once they have their own child, they'll get rid of this doctrine of original sin, which is bullshit.
Yeah, me too.
That how can a child said to have sin in them when they're born? I mean, it's nonsense. But
I know.
Anyway, when I forgot what I was saying. Oh, but the children. When you have your own child, you recognize that they are teaching you. You're not teaching them anything. You're looking at the universe through their eyes.
Yeah.
Creation. That's how I saw it. I mean, I saw every person a moment as that. I was there to learn. And also, I thought the church might be a place, I guess similarly to the liberation theologians in Latin America, who I had worked a little bit with. I'd gone to Mexico before in the 80s when I was training for the ministry and being really influenced there by a number of defraud Catholic priests who were working with the peasants, who were saying, to hell with the church, let's create the kingdom of heaven here now.
Wow.
And
what happened to their movement? Is it
one
still
of them,
going?
Well, one of them got killed and others disappeared. I mean, it's what happens, right? But the thing is, I thought, we need that here in Canada. So I thought my church might be a place where I could do that. So in Port Alberni, when all this stuff opened up and blew up, that's what I did. I got there, I found 10 people in the pews, and I said, okay, you want me to build a church? Because that's what they hired me for. They knew they were dying. They hired me unanimously to bring in new blood, as they called it. So I opened the doors. I opened a food bank. We went from 10 to about 80 people in 6 months. We had it filled, and we began. I said, here's where we can bring Aboriginals and whites, poor and rich, together, become one body. That's what it says. That's what the revolution of the gospel is. You create that equality and justice right here.
Because I'm getting it, and I'm glad I asked you
Yeah.
that. Because I'm getting why you chose to follow that path. But at the same time, yeah, I get it. I mean, I wanted to clarify that just for myself. I guess that's why I wanted to do this interview so much.
Well, yeah.
So I guess, now, I'm assuming that most people that are watching this know what Kevin has exposed. Do you have a hyphenated version of it?
No.
Okay.
There's no short version, and that's why
I know.
people come to me and say, well, like, tell me what you're about. I said, no, I can't. You're going to have to read the material, take hours, and go through it. We're not a 3-second soundbite here.
Yeah.
There's a whole history and knowledge you need to take in before you can even begin to understand any of this. So, itccs.org. hiddennolonger.com.
And there's a lot of information there, a lot. And it's, it's just absolutely amazing. It's amazing how the courage that you had getting that out there. And so I guess that could bring me to the next question. Do you see yourself as being courageous and fearless? And
Sometimes. Other times it's scared as hell, but it's not so much fear or lack of it, is what do you do with it? It's like,
you're compelled to tell the truth no matter what, right?
well, I couldn't live with myself, and that's why I find it really hard when people say they don't understand that, because I'm confronted with the fact that my church, at the time, the United Church, is like the Catholics and Anglicans, that they've got blood on their hands, that they caused the death of children, they covered it up, they let it go on decade after decade, and the fact that they did that tells me, well, how the hell could they claim to be anything to do with Christ, or even simple morality or legality, when they allow that shit to go on after?
I know.
Okay? And so for them, that is reason enough to leave the church right there. Boom, they're phonies. Okay? But for those who feel that they have to masochistically stay in those organizations, you say, well, what are you achieving by that? Why do people go to church? It's because they feel that they're going to be in trouble if they don't, that they might go to hell, that it's the only place they can go to feel good.
What about the ritual of it? Is that what attracts people as well?
No, I find, by and large, it's a social club. That with Catholics, maybe the ritual, because they've come to equate the ritual with salvation.
Well, Greeks are very ritual oriented too, right?
They're looking at the box and not what's in it. They're not. It's about spirit, which cannot be put in a box or a church or a dogma, right?
And I think that you'll maybe agree with me, maybe not, but I spent some time on a Greek Orthodox monastery at a time in my life when I was willing to go to a Buddhist. I didn't care what monastery. I just wanted to get to a monastery. I love some of those monks. To say they're great because they're Greek Orthodox, I think they're just great guys.
Exactly.
And
what you call it.
And so I'm not going to poison them with what I feel. They wanted me to get baptized, and I couldn't do it at the exclusion of all the other faiths. And there's a part of me also, maybe you agree with the whole notion of, Jesus on the cross. I mean, eating his body, the sacraments. I mean, drinking his blood. I mean, it's very ritualistic, but it just seems odd to me.
Well, it's not just odd. That whole thing is about, I believe, a means of traumatizing people. I mean, look around you right here. This is all the baptism you need. This is the body of Christ in nature, in each one of us. There's that, we're given this priceless gift, free, right? That's how the love of the universe is shown to us, right? the fact that you have to create this whole thing that he died for you and you have to eat of his flesh and go through his sacrifice, otherwise you're damned. I mean, it's twisted. It has really nothing to do with what he was actually
But see, if we
saying.
say this, then, and you're that's maybe where you're compelled to tell the truth no matter what.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining people watching this going, "Oh my God, what is he saying?" Like a Catholic that goes and takes communion or whatever.
I'm
And
not
it's like,
attacking people's belief. I'm just saying your belief is one thing, but there's a knowing we all have that's a common line behind everything or beneath everything. There's a common denominator that unites us all. That's our humanity. And it doesn't matter what you call yourself. That's, you could call it the natural law, right? But you guide yourself according to the natural law, and you can't do any wrong. Because the natural law is simple. It's you treat each other humanely. You love one another. Well, Jesus summed it up. You love God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. That's the law. You don't need 163 or however many commandments of what to do or not to do. So, I mean, this is all what you hear in a sermon any day. I'm not saying anything original, but what you do has to be original every moment, because the clergy talk about this, but when the crunch comes, they never act on it because they're controlled. They're I saw that. Okay, I found out my church had murdered children. I tried to get them to do the right thing, and they told me to shut up, because at that point they weren't getting sued. When they started getting sued, they started issuing apologies. Eventually.
How did they get sued? Did you bring about the lawsuit?
Yeah, I was involved in the first lawsuit.
That's our Kevin. Yeah.
That was in 1995. It started the year I got fired. No coincidence there. The ship was coming down, and they knew they had to get rid of me and the people I was working with, so they did everything possible to crush us out of existence. That didn't work. In 1998, the lawsuit of residential school survivors in Port Alberni, brought against the United Church and the federal government, it was called the Brenner decision, and it said, yes, the United Church and the government are guilty of all these crimes. How come no United Church official has ever gone to jail then? There wasn't a deal worked out, was there?
Oh, God, yeah. It reminds me about, what you mentioned the other night also was about, there's an official apology, 2000, that you pushed for, almost single-handedly, and then they get an apology. I mean, it's just so insane.
Well, okay,
there's an apology, but no one goes to jail. No one's prosecuted. Nothing ever. It's like we're going to apologize and then fuck off, go away.
There's a crime with no criminals. It's the churches were told, you can hold on to all your documents. You don't have to show us anything you don't want. We're not going to subpoena you. But we call that healing. I mean, it's kind of like, imagine if I was a serial killer. I killed 5 kids, hid their bodies, and then I didn't have to do any jail time because I went to the relatives and said, I'm sorry, here's some money. Well, these churches have killed 50,000 or more children, not 5. And they've gotten away with that. So go tell me how that works.
How many children do you think have been killed? How many Aboriginal children in residential schools?
It was at
total?
least 50 to 100,000. Government's statistics show half of them never came back. 250,000 attended over a century. Do the math.
God. I know. And what was it, tuberculosis as well?
They take the healthy,
stick
them in with the sick, lock the doors, half of them are dead. I mean, you depopulate the land that way.
Well, what kind of psychopath? How could a psychopath? I mean, what kind of psychopath is capable of doing that? Do they get their orders from up above in the hierarchy of the church, and then they go ahead and I'm just doing my job?
You'd be surprised what your average person will do for a job. Maybe it won't be.
No, I'm actually I'm ashamed of the human condition today, because I'm ashamed that 1 + 1 = 2 when things are so blatantly obvious. And what you're talking about, I'm talking about, and also that's to be inclusive of. I want to be inclusive of like ritual abuse. I want to be inclusive of Agenda 21. I mean, chemtrails, most certainly, but it's on such an epic level right now.
I'll give you an example of how it happens. A woman called Marion McFarlane came to a forum we did in Vancouver in February 1998. And she got up, she was a white woman. The place was filled with Aboriginal people. And we had sponsored, by we I mean the handful of us who were working on this back then, before the government came in and co-opted a lot of it. And there were about 300 people in this Simon Fraser Harbour Centre hall, in downtown Vancouver. And this white woman gets up and said, I worked in a residential school. And people are shocked. They said, whoa, a white woman here. And some of the survivors started getting really angry, but we let her speak, right? She said, one day, I worked there only for a year. I couldn't tolerate it. She worked at the United Church School in Port Alberni, where I'd been. She worked there in the early 1960s. She said she came across a matron beating a little girl to death with a piano leg. The blood was flying. She was going to kill this girl. So Marion grabs this woman and belts her, knocks her cold to defend the little girl. John Andrews, the principal, calls her in front of him and fires Marion for hitting that woman. And she said, what do you mean? She was beating that girl to death. Andrews says, anything that happened to that little squaw would have been preferable to losing her because she plays the organ in church on Sunday. The woman who is beating the girl to death. Now, it shows you not only where the kids rank in the hierarchy, but the humanitarian people get forced out of the system, and who's left? The ones who are willing to beat a kid to death.
The sociopaths.
They help one another. They protect each other. The law protects them. Everybody has a vested interest in hiding the truth. That's how any corporate system operates. It's how the church still operates.
I just want to know why our human condition is like that. And I'm talking, this is just absolutely atrocious what you've exposed. And then your interview with Toos, I encourage people to look at that too when you were in Holland. Just a lot of the stuff that you've uncovered is just amazing. And I'm always surprised that, oh, well, Kevin, who is this Kevin Annett? And I'm like, how do I just say he's telling the truth. I mean, how much money have you made from all these things you've exposed? Like, what type of opulence are you living right now?
Working with all these homeless people?
Yeah.
I lost my job in 95. I was blacklisted. I haven't had any full-time income since 95, so what's that, 18 years? I get donations. I live from what the community gives me.
And how much, like, what kind of crazy donations are we talking about?
Well, it varies, now and then, especially when people hear that I'm traveling.
Right.
Travel money will come through, and I rarely ask for it. Sometimes we put out appeals, but it never comes very often, partly because of the whole smear and misinformation campaign that's generated by the government. It started in the summer of 1998. We have proof about that. But anyway, somebody will come across with $1,000 or $2,000 to get me to Europe and back, and I go live hand to mouth. But that's okay. That's how you're meant to live when you're doing the right thing, because you don't store up wealth for this stuff. It's given to you to keep you honest. It's given to you when you're meant to do it, right? And
how much organic food can you buy? Because we can't buy hardly any.
I know.
Our friend likes to eat organic, and it's like, we're leaving hand to mouth as well. I sell a painting or whatever, then I can eat for a bit.
Well, exactly.
But, and I don't think I want to live a martyr's life or anything like that. But I think that it's just, I admire you so much, man, and I just think.
Don't say that too loudly, or you'll get targeted.
Oh, I'm already targeted,
anyway,
so it doesn't matter.
As a matter of fact,
I don't care anymore. But
don't worry about it.
The funny thing is that to me, it's you've been operating. Objectively looking at you, I see you as someone with integrity, but really just a guy who's just done the right thing. It's really not. People call it extraordinary and stuff. Well, you've been really like a dog with a bone with it. That's extraordinary. But aside from that, to me, you represent a man who's just a guy who came across some things, and you did the right thing. What frightens me and worries me more, and I've experienced it also in my world, is people's apathy, man, and how people can justify going along with the flow. Are we as humans such social animals that we're so afraid of stepping outside of the herd?
Well, I think it's more than that. I think when you say, I was just this ordinary guy, I definitely started that way, but I got changed in the process. And to tell you the truth, it's always the hardest part to talk about, our losses, right? But it's after I lost my family, lost my kids, because the church, as people probably know, helped get my daughters taken from me by intervening in my lawsuit, in the family court lawsuit that my wife brought against me. After I was fired, because they went to her and said, hey, we'll help you if you leave this guy. And that came out in the court.
Why did she go along with that, I wonder?
Her own issues. She didn't want to have to go through a lot of the uncertainty, I guess. of living with a blacklisted minister.
Does she ever talk to you anymore?
Not really. But
No.
but I had I tried to keep it amiable for the sake of my daughters all the time. But the point is that when that all happened, and I lost everything, and in here, not just materially,
Yeah,
which
I
didn't
know,
really
I
matter,
know.
but I went to the healing circles, and the people could see that I had suffered something, that I was understanding them on that heart level, not up here. I wasn't the helper coming in to fix anything, right? And they opened up to me on that basis. That's how this whole thing started, because I came to them as somebody who was also hurt and wounded and suffering and dying. And that, frankly, that part of me did die. I look at the way I was back then, and I'm not the same man now. I've grown stronger and I think better for having gone through all this. So we change all the time. We evolve all the time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to say, at the time, I was just one minister working on this stuff to try to do what's right, because I didn't want to let them win. I didn't want the lies to win again. They were trying to make me seem like I was crazy. They do things to get people to kill themselves, to be driven crazy, and then they can say, "You see, he was crazy."
Yeah, I know.
Everything
I know.
is designed to do that.
I know,
as
man,
Any
I know.
whistleblower knows.
Oh boy. What would you say is your greatest accomplishment?
Having survived.
You hear that, Mushy?
But rocking Rome, getting a pope to resign, I had a role in it. I don't want to claim credit for the whole thing. Opening up the real history of Canada, saving the lives of thousands of people, born and not yet born, who are not going to suffer as much because of the work we brought out. I mean, it's great to know that you've saved a life, and many lives, and this work has done that. So I'm happy. I could die now very happy because of what I've done.
You're not going anywhere, though.
You never know.
You never know, but I don't think so, because you've mentioned before also, like, there is a certain protection. There's people around you that have been murdered, and yet you're still here.
Yeah.
So there's something that wants you to keep doing what
There
you're
is,
doing.
yeah. I feel that all the time. And people say, how come he's still alive? Well, I think it's proof that if you stand in the truth, that in itself provides you that protection.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in the system who are sympathetic. Who are
Yeah,
secretly
because
on
they
side
probably
with us.
wish they could come out and speak
I've
out
had
about what they've
cops,
experienced.
I've had politicians, cops, even members of the clergy come to me and say, we're behind you, would like to help, but I don't want to lose my pension.
Oh,
my life's being
God.
threatened. Everything. Okay, so they can. But they provide a little bit of help, a little bit of information, a little bit of protection. And it keeps going. Right? I mean, it's the point is we're all doing this. And the thing that I can't tolerate is people who sit back and say, you're doing it for me. Maybe it's that kind of thing we've had drilled into us, Christ died for our sins. The hero will die for us to save humanity. You get that in movies all the time. Well, it's crap. I mean, we are our own hero, and you all have to kind of waken up to that fact.
Yeah. That's well said. Yep. I don't know how well I've done there, but I've tried. What do you think you want most people to know about you? If you could sort of... I don't know. I guess that's a tough one, isn't it?
No, I don't want them to know a lot of the details, although it helps. What I want them to know is to look at my life as an example of how one person can make a difference if they're standing on the truth and if they're consistent. And I don't mean 5 or 10 times. I mean you devote your life to something once you find your real purpose. Because I found my purpose in life. And a person who's on their purpose and doesn't give up is almost invincible. They have to kill them because they can't be stopped. We see that all over the world. One person pushing caused Harper to issue an apology over something they didn't want to talk about. Okay? That's just one example here in Canada of what I've done. But other people achieve much more by saying, look, I don't care if the military and the CIA and every corporation on the planet are against what we're doing. They don't have any power. Their power rests on our fear and on the illusion that they have power.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
And our cooperation with their system out of fear.
Yeah, I
paying
get
their
it.
taxes.
Fear is the greatest way to move us around.
It's the only way to control us.
Yeah.
So once you overcome your fear of death, which I did, I don't care what they do to me. They're pathetic. They're powerless in the face of our truth and what we know is coming down, which is their system is collapsing at every level. And the question now is, what are we going to replace it with?
Okay, here we come now. Ready? We're moving on to we're moving in. We're moving along here. Here we go. This is the big question now is, what does the future hold for us when we're living in what I view anyway? I don't know how you feel about this, but it's almost like the powers, I even hate using that word, and I never use the word elite referring to these people. The trailer park inbred scum is probably maybe closer. Dr. Evil and his gang. Anyway, they seem to be bringing in an artificial world where everything's artificial. Our food's now artificial. Our chemtrails, our water, everything's being contaminated. Transhumanism is huge. I'm quite sure cloning's been perfected, or certainly more than a dolly sheep. So with this artificial world, geez, where does a guy like you fit in?
Well, I think like a guy like you or me or anybody doesn't have a future in that kind of world. That they're designing, I agree with you, they're designing a world that is not based on nature or justice or anything, but machine efficiency. It's the ultimate corporate structure. You have the corporation develop the Vatican. They were the world's first corporation in Rome. And now that's spread all over the planet as a social system. And now it's becoming biological, too. Because in a corporate system, there's only one rule, efficiency. Not humanity, not any human priority. And it's almost like in those sci-fi films about the Borg, you know, how they, in Star Trek, the Borg or the cybernetic organisms that turn everything into a component of their one machine. That's exactly what's happening. Look at the kids on the sky.
I know, man.
Bus becoming a component. Their mind is wired into a machine now that they can't live without. And we got to take all those machines and turn them off, smash them. And, okay, sure, we're relying on a machine right now. On the internet, you're going to read this. But it doesn't matter, any of what you view right now, if you're not willing to detach and reestablish who we are. And that means rooted in the earth and rooted in here.
Well, if they shut down electricity, and I mean, we've been lied to about everything.
Yeah.
Sonia often says that from the Truther Girls, that it's complete. It's the reverse of what we've.
That's why our minds are our biggest deceivers at times. The mind can be controlled and deceived, but the heart can't.
Right.
And that's why we emerge the mind. I often visualize it like there's a mind within our heart, right? A consciousness there, and you kind of and visualize the heart surrounding the mind and saying, what does it tell you to think? What is it? Not what the external stimuli and your teaching and indoctrination and the media teach you, but rather what does this teach you? And what is the intelligence that comes out of that?
That's beautiful.
That's my guide, and that's what I rely on, because they use all sorts of methods to stop us and confuse us.
Well, I guess I sometimes feel things on a cellular level, and my children and what happened, and me falling down the rabbit hole and finding out about ritual abuse and all these horrors, and then understanding something, and maybe some people have gone through that with some of the information you put forth. It's like you understand it intellectually, and people can sit there and read about the horrors of residential schooling, and yet they don't get up out of their chair, or they don't get up from behind their computer, but they'll read about it, and they'll feel a tinge, and I'm not trying to insult the audience, but you'll feel a tinge of, gee, that's too bad. And then you're right on to the next, video from so-and-so or whatever. And it's like, we almost need to slow stuff down, or at least try to access a part of us that can start feeling things on a cellular level.
Well, you got to sit with somebody who's been through one of these tortures and hear from themselves and see in their eyes and try to imagine with them what they went through. That's the way to get it, not by reading facts. I mean, just in terms of that crime. That's a better way to do. But then you also have to ask yourself, what is it in me that's resisting like that? What is stopping me from having empathy? And we have to realize after a while that every one of us at a very young age had empathy driven out of us.
Yeah, right on. The school system, everything,
it's
right?
designed to drive out empathy, and it does that by numbing us to our own pain. Because every one of us was raised in a way where our original self was violated and twisted in some way. Okay? Like, even if you weren't battered physically or sexually or anything as a kid, the minute you have a thought, they say, nope, don't think that, think this. Don't feel that. And the most common one is to believe in lies. Because a kid knows the difference between truth and a lie. And they say, like, Mommy, why doesn't Dad have a job? Don't tell people that. It'll make me look bad. Okay, so lie about what your father does or doesn't do. You're taught to lie at every level of society. And so when you're trained to do that, you become numb to what was done to you, which was we were all violated.
Do you think that's all intentional?
Yes, because that's the best way to control a population, to traumatize them as a child.
Right.
That's why Catholic priests are supposed to protect one another when they rape children. That's written in stone in that law, Crimen Solicitatis. A child is raped in a Catholic church, they're protected, and the police are never told. How could society allow that to function unless they were in support of that? That's why the church has never been shut down or gone to jail for any of that, because it reflects the way our society is. It rests on child torture, because child torture is the basis of all elite rule.
Yeah.
And the image of Jesus hanging on the cross, what do we get from day one? God gave up his son to be tortured and killed for us. Child abuse, ritual child torture depicted as the will of God, okay? I mean, it's all pretty clear when you see the pattern. And the pattern is elites can only control a majority if they are subservient in their own minds and hearts. And you get that if you've been battered at a young enough age. It's
do you believe in generational ritual abuse?
It's all intergenerational.
That these people have done, yeah.
Well, the overt kind, like satanic ritual torture and that's just a more extreme version of what I'm talking about. It happens. The school system is the intergenerational.
No, yeah, you're right. I know what you mean. There's varying degrees, but it's the same. It's the same thing. Yeah. I often use the politicians. Would you want to have a friend that makes you all these promises and constantly doesn't fulfill their end of the bargain and is always letting you down and basically hurting you?
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't accept that in a friend, but we're all conditioned to believe. Well, politicians lie, of course.
Well, why do people turn the other way when an injustice is done? And the automatic response is, I can't do anything about it. That is the voice of the battered child speaking. It's not a voice of a rational, normal person speaking. When you say, I can't do anything to fight City Hall, that's the 2-year-old who's just being hit or told what to do speaking, right? We have to overcome that on ourselves before you can't fight injustice in society unless you face that in yourself. It's impossible.
So how are we going to shut down the artificial world?
By that, from the grassroots.
Truth?
Well, from the grassroots, but active reclaiming of it. And this is the thing I learned from the Mohawks, who continually talk about reclaiming the land. It's reclaiming ourselves and our own minds, not paying the taxes, not being involved with their whole stupid system, taking your money out of the banks, putting it locally, taking back control of the earth. But you can't do that without controlling yourself first, and that's the hard part.
How do we control ourselves?
Know yourself. Know what's being done to you. And go through a discipline every day where you remember what is real. What is real, not what's being given to you. The imagery, the way we're expected to live vicariously through other people. Movie stars. Justin Bieber. Brad Pitt, who you know.
Yeah, it's been an eye-opener for me to see what an absolute huge programming tool.
Yeah.
Film, television,
yeah,
all of it, and it's only been revved up in the last 10 years.
Yeah,
it's really disgusting. And when I even kids with video games, and they're all, I want to be a transhuman. I want to have an arm that's got like an AK-47 attached to it, and I can jump off the 20th floor.
Well, again, that's a more obvious example, like extreme, but at a more basic level, we're all expected to identify with some authority or person outside ourselves as our real identity. We can't see
the hero inside.
No, we cannot see the God within us. And I don't mean we're all God, because I don't believe in that New Age philosophy, but there is magnificence within us which comes out at the worst times, and I've encountered that. I mean, it's what's changed me.
And you're not afraid of dying. Well, maybe a lot of people shouldn't be afraid of dying. Where do we go when we die anyway?
I don't think most of us are living yet. So how can we even talk about dying? We haven't. We're all. We all possess dead souls that haven't woken up yet.
Oh God, it's so sad, really.
I know, but we can wake up. That's the point. And then we know real life, and you realize death and life are an illusion. They're just ways of controlling us. Those notions,
So why do we have this body, and why are we even here? I mean, that's a pretty big question.
For joy? I mean, it's a fun ride. Life is an amazing, beautiful
That's true. Well,
ride.
You got the big roller coaster.
Well, joy or sorrow, it's still beautiful. You can see, like, in that film, Thin Red Line, I don't know if you saw Terrence Malick film. He said, some people see the bird die and they just see suffering. others can see past it to the glory. And I think of that all the time. When my friends are being killed and died, I see past that to the glory of who they still are and how they're still holding witness to what they died for and everything. And once you find that glory, it can't be taken from you. It's what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven.
It also opens you up to allow yourself to feel sadness.
Real sadness.
Sometimes we need to. It's living in this world that we live in. There's nothing, I don't think, mentally ill. Big pharma can't convince me to take a pill if I feel sad.
The great grief and the great joy, it's something that when you're not allowed to feel, you just operate on this thin little kind of...
Sure, you're considered manic depressive or bipolar. Which brings you into psychiatry and that phoniness, but anyway.
The whole big pharma industry, yeah.
Well, I sure appreciate you coming to have a chat with me, and I hope I've...
We'll do it again.
I loved it, man.
We'll have a whole series. Different themes.
What are we going to call it? My lunch with Kevin instead of my dinner with Andre. I'm just going to read you this one little passage which I love. The real victory happens as a mystery, when we become the truth that we have revealed at the apparent cost of everything. From trotting that empty road, we finally become the path by which our remnant people endure. And that was you in June this year.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man.
Thanks a lot, brother.
Thank you. Thanks. Hey, crew!
I want to start with a little bit of the history, the things that led me to my present situation. Going back to the year I was ordained. The year is 1990, and the location is southwest Manitoba, where I have my first charge as a United Church minister. Down the road from my home pastoral charge were my two smaller parishes of a few dozen people, remnants of once thriving communities when that leg of the railway was still operating. Lyleton still bore the resemblance of a town, although the post office had closed the year before I arrived. Its United Church was the only public building left in town, where on busy Sundays 10 or 15 congregants could be found singing the old hymns a cappella, since they had no organist, or more likely they were all staunch Presbyterians. The other parish, Coultervale, had evaporated long before, and its citizens were scattered in lone farmhouses like lonely sentinels in an unending night. My parishioners there used the abandoned community center for their worship services, but they could boast an organist at least, a cheery young fellow named Greg Fletcher, who pounded away on an old piano during the services and sang along with everyone to help out all the aged and stumbling voices. The following year, Greg Fletcher would choke to death at the dinner table in front of his new wife, Betty, but I was gone by then. The Downey family held sway in both towns. Leighton Downey was a kindly old man who was the chairman of the Coultervale Church, but he called the shots in Lyleton too, since long ago his grandfather had donated the land to the Presbyterians to build a church there. Leighton also helped me gain 10 pounds that year that I was there by his irresistible homemade baking, samples of which I always found faithfully placed on the seat of my Jeep after every Sunday service. 50 years before that, during World War II, Leighton and his brother Frank had married two sisters from nearby Brandon and brought them to their homestead farms west of the town. A year later, the sisters had lost their baby brother at the shooting gallery called the Battle of Dieppe, and then a month later, their oldest brother's Lancaster bomber was shot down over Germany. Commemorating the death of the two Downey brothers became the focal point of the religious life of both communities over the years, as if the determination never to forget them would somehow also preserve the spirit of those people that was dissipating like the good soil blown into four directions. I caught on to that central story in their lives early on, and it helped me to speak to them from the pulpit in something more than abstractions and metaphors. What was difficult and practically impossible was to get any of them to budge from their age-old pew positions in order to move closer to me during the Sunday service. It made sense, I suppose, in the still-standing church in Lyleton, where a tottering old woman of 90 once nostalgically pointed to her 8-year-old initial she had carved on the wooden pew an entire lifetime before. And she said to me, "My family and I have always sat there, Reverend, and I'll be here even after I'm gone to meet my Maker. Fair enough. Although I had to pretty much bellow to be heard to the bare dozen of the Lyleton congregation dispersed throughout the 200-person capacity church. But this stubborn stick-to-your-own-spot attitude seemed slightly ridiculous in the Coulterville congregation, where folding chairs constituted the pews and were rearranged every week. Regardless of that, everyone could always be found in exactly the same place every Sunday. It was more than a challenge to do all 3 of the Sunday services in the time allotted to me, and required a lot of fast driving down gravel roads to cover the 40-mile diameter of my charge. The Pearson church service was first at 9:30 a.m., then Lyleton at 11, and Coulterville at 12:30. They rotated every year, but the breakneck routine was sometimes hazardous. I once sped off into a ditch on my way to Lyleton, thankfully not during the winter, and a local farmer pulled me out with his tractor in time to make at least part of the service, bruised but intact. The local RCMP detachment came to know me quite well on the back roads, and parked cops would usually just wave at me as I sped by well over the speed limit, since they all knew where I was bound and why. After my first few weeks of the Sunday mania, Leighton Downey used to stand in the doorway of the community hall, pretending to look vexed when I ran up clutching my Bible and robe, tapping his watch with a fake scowl. It must have been a source of amusement to the different congregations. Those were really golden days for me. And not only from the natural joy of being a new father and minister, and a man very much in love with his wife, I was regularly surprised by heaven. One Saturday I was called out to do a funeral far out in the prairies south of Lyleton, practically on the North Dakota border. A small crowd awaited me at the cemetery atop a little forested hill. I'd have met normally with the family beforehand to get to know everyone before the service, but the deceased was a woman from outside the district with no relations who were still alive. And the undertaker in Melita knew that I'd do the service, and so he asked me. They were all strange and aged faces that welcomed me as I swung open the metal gate and stood over the casket in the open ground. It was a cold and blustery day. The mourners were all fellow residents of the care home where she had died, and apparently her death was not unexpected. So I said some prayers and words, and then asked if anyone had something to say about Eunice, the one who had left us. The wind was the only response, and for a while we all just stood there in our own thoughts, until finally a very old woman stepped forward and she spoke very softly, and she said these words, "Eunice here was my dearest and oldest friend ever since we were 4 years old. I knew her through bad times and good ones. She lived here right through the droughts and all the depression, and she had 3 children, and she lost 2 of them. But the worse things got, the better she got." And that was all that needed to be said. Some 3 years later, I ended up in Port Alberni on Canada's west coast, where a lot of this revelation of the residential school genocide was uncovered because of what I began to experience in that town and other things. But the word genocide is an abstraction to all of us. But before that word genocide came its reality. Before I spoke about the crime, I bore it in my own grasp the night that a little Indian boy called Arthur Gomez died. This was in October 1993. Now, Arthur Gomez was an odd name for an Indian, especially West Coast natives. But I never asked about it after getting the call to hurry to West Coast General Hospital. It was past midnight, and my own family was fast asleep. "He's dead, Reverend. Our little boy, he's dead." His father met me on the ward, crushed, beyond help. The mother was passed out, drugged to dull her hysteria, and Arthur's tiny corpse lay beside her on the bed. I don't remember our words, for they meant nothing next to the little life that could never be lived. I do recall lifting that impossibly light body in my arms and carrying it to the bathroom sink, where, true to the father's wishes, I baptized Arthur Gomez in the name of a reclusive God. The baby's hair was jet black and damp and still warm. I remember kissing that hair and handing the father his son. I never saw them again. Arthur was given a traditional New Chelmsford native burial, the kind denied so many other dead brown babies buried in secret just a mile from where Arthur had died. His mother had survived the Alberni Christian death camp called a residential school, although not really. But her subsequent drinking and drug-taking had claimed her son in as sacred a place as her own womb. I spoke about Arthur Gomez the next Sunday in church. I was told it was inappropriate to do so. And finally, many years later in Vancouver, in the streets of Vancouver in 2012, my friend Harry Wilson died, another dead Native man. Harry Wilson died the way he had lived, unnoticed and battered. He had been one of the very first Port Alberni residential school survivors who had spoken out, and he usually showed up at all our demonstrations and radio programs. Afterwards, Harry and I always parted with something incomplete between us, as if we were preparing to never see each other again. That went on for years, because unlike most of the other residential school survivors, Harry beat the odds for a long time. Living on and off the street like most of our group did, Harry endured as if by a miracle. He regularly slipped his way into hospital bathrooms and drank off all the alcoholic hand wash from the dispensers. He bartered away his clothes for a Mickey of rye. Most of the time he couldn't string 5 words together without gagging or crying. But the years slipped by and Harry Wilson was still there. A special kind of fiber allows a boy to undergo anal rape and electric shocks to his penis and then speak about it 30 years later to strangers. Time and his enemies wore at this hard substance in Harry, but it did so only slowly, allowing the crime and his character to be known. But eventually it all caught up to him. I was out of town when he died. The city coroner was especially tight-lipped about how Harry had died. None of the usual excuses to cover the killing of an Indian were offered. Neither suicide, nor alcoholic poisoning, nor tuberculosis was given as Harry's cause of death. Nothing had caused it, apparently. He just died. I retain a picture of he and I in better times, on the eve of our first tribunal in the summer of 1998, when we thought that telling the truth would make a difference. Here is smiling as best as he could in the photo, his arm self-consciously hooked around my shoulder. Harry could never be touched by anyone, but that day we were arm in arm. He always cried the hardest when he recalled finding the body of a young girl on the grounds of the Alberni Residential School when he was only 12 years old. She was small, covered in blood, and stone cold. She had died the way Harry would one day, which is perhaps why he never stopped talking about her, and why he never let go of her.